All right. Okay. So, just wanted to run through a couple things here. Want to kind of talk through the process of what onboarding looks like, what the tools look like, what the process overview, um, and then kind of run down some editing and some writing articles, um, tips and tricks and things that we've learned. So, just kind of starting at the top, when you first start with ATA, we ask a couple questions. Through the onboarding process, you'll be kind of asked about your specialties, what you want to write about. And one of the reasons we ask about that, and not everyone's kind of filled this out, or we didn't ask in the beginning, was it actually helps inform our pre-approved topics list. So it is important that if there are topics that you want to write about, or you have a specialty that you're really good at, to actually let me know, really, um, either email or Slack or whatever. But it actually will help us to create that pre-approved topics list and find more topics that might be of interest to you. So it's something kind of know as you're going through the onboarding, or even if you've been here for a while. The other thing that we do, we're going to create you a WordPress account for the ATA website. It says an author, so you can see your own authored articles. Typically, you don't really ever use this. The time that you would is, say you've gotten a comment on one of your posts, or you yourself have noticed that, hey, I've got an error, I got a problem, something happened. You could log in, go to your article, make that correction, and then hit publish. When you do that, it'll actually go to an editor on the site to say, yeah, somebody updated this, so we should go ahead and publish it. Typically we'll just publish that update, but it's really there for correcting articles. As anyone who has been doing this may have noticed that, you will be doing all your writing in Notion. Um, so one of the other things that you want to do is set up your Gravatar. And this is really kind of to help present yourself a little bit too. When you go to Gravatar, it's I don't know if it's subsidiary or just a corollary service to WordPress, but really what it's intended to be is a place to have a common identity shared across WordPress sites. So really use the same email that you have used for the ATA website, which would have been your original contact email, basically. And then once you create that Gravatar, give it an image, you will actually have that image automatically show on your posts. So this is really helpful for just not being an anonymous author, because one of the things that we try to do is help you build up a portfolio. It's not just ATA content, it's not just ATA things, it's really you yourself as an author are kind of building your portfolio content, using ATA as a platform to help get your name out. So it does add a bit of authenticity and differentiation to yourself. And so it's definitely important to do that. And then finally, we ask about your preferred payment method. Right now, we just do PayPal and Payoneer, if I'm saying that right. And really, that payment email that you want, which might be different from your contact email, is important for PayPal. So just make sure to let us know so we get that routed correctly. So primarily we use two tools, Trello and Notion. So Trello is right now how we manage the stages a particular article is in. We are looking at different ways or a different method instead of Trello, but for now it's Trello. So you will be added to the ATA blog post board using your contact email. If you do need that changed, let me know. It does require removing you and re-inviting, but is doable. But Trello is really where you're going to drag and drop, a given article. If you want to take it from the pre-approved to actually writing it, and through editing and all of that. Notion is what we use for writing, editing, and as a feedback tool. And so what this will be is we'll share a blog post or an article to you as the author. It will show up under your shared section in Notion under your kind of private setup. It'll show as a shared post or a shared page. And then you should also receive an email. But this is where you're going to actually go in, do the writing. We can then see, the content shared between us. We can make comments on it. You can do your edits there. It's a great tool for doing all of that kind of all in one. So you may have seen this diagram. This is just the diagram I've made for the ATA publishing workflow. There are a few steps after the SEO review, but they're really not relevant to you as a author for what you need to worry about. But the basic gist of it is you're taking a topic, go in topic review. Once it's approved, it goes to an outline, which goes to a draft, which goes to editing, which may or may not go to revision, and ultimately gets published. This is in the ATA Friends documentation. You can find it in there. All of those little yellow badges on there are the time, the max amount of time that it should be in there. So 2 days to 14 days, that kind of thing. But helpful if you want to kind of get a sense of what exactly the flow is and how we're managing that process. But to kind of walk down that a little bit further, so the very first thing you're doing is you got to pick a topic. Now, this might be a topic from the pre-approved topics list, or you might be pitching your own, which you can certainly do. If you are choosing one from the pre-approved topics list, assign yourself as a member to the card and move it to the topic review. If you're pitching your own, create a card, assign yourself as a member, move it to topic review, and create a description for it so we have an idea of what you're trying to write about. The reason that the pre-approved topics, they're ones that we've already looked at, especially with the SEO side. As much as we would love to pay for every topic under the sun, there are some, that do much better than others. One thing to note about the topics, though, is if you really do want to write something, we will certainly publish it. It may or may not be paid depending on what the topic is. But if you just want to use ATA as a site to write a topic, utilize our editing process to get it really, honed and well written, then by all means, we will certainly, do that. If it's a really niche topic that probably wouldn't generate a ton of traffic, though one never knows, then, you could still write about it. It just might not be paid out at the normal rate, or, we'll still take the content, and then you can use ATA to promote and as a vehicle for that. But once you've pitched your topic, it will be reviewed. Most pre-approved topics will just kind of move on over to writer outline. If you're pitching your own, we just need to double check that it all kind of makes sense. Hopefully it would be one that kind of fits with the SEO requirements, and then we can move it right along. But if not, then we just have to have that conversation of, well, what exactly would we like to do with this? But once it is approved, we'll ask for a writer outline to be filled in. So I think the writer outline, this is really just a quick way to make sure that what you're writing and the format of what you're writing is going to make sense. It really shouldn't take you super long, 20, 30, 40 minutes, somewhere in there, just to kind of help you focus an article, identify any unnecessary content or areas that might need additional focus. Just make sure that we're hitting all the parts that we need to. So don't spend a ton of time overthinking this section. Just kind of try to put down what's being asked on the outline, and then we'll review it and move it on. So once that is done and approved, then we'll move it to writer draft, and you'll have 14 days to work through the article. So 2 weeks. Any questions you might have, any requirements that you weren't sure of, or anything like that, this is a great time to ask as you're going through and managing it. So once you've written that, you'll move the card onto editing. The ATA editors will take their first pass at an article, and once they've made their comments, all of their thoughts on that, they'll move it back to writer revision, and you'll have a chance to work through all that, and you've got 7 days to do that. So once you're done with those, once again, you'll move it back to editing, at which time the editors may just edit the rest of the article and send it off to publication without sending it back to you, depending on the number of changes and if there's additional questions. It may be a short little question, or it may need more time and end up back to you for writer revision. We try really hard, though, not to do that more than twice. If we've gone back and forth more than twice, at that point, we'll probably just take the article and just run it through all the editing on our side and rewrite anything that needs to be, and then move on from there. And then once that is finally done, the article moves on to SEO review and on to publication. So that's an overview of the process. Nothing new, but hopefully it does have a little bit of maybe information if you were missing that. But some of the questions that have come up usually around the editing or the article writing process, often around the editing process. So for editing, what do we look for? Well, we're looking for the sentence structure, ordered, unordered lists for 3 or more items, accurate and or missing screenshots, screenshots that don't show output or only running a command, which isn't necessary, captions on images. Every image should have one. And related links, these are often missed. Not, we can usually fill them in, but it'd be great if you could. Essentially, it's just we're trying to build that internal related links to, content on the ATA site. So nothing fancy about it. As you can see, it's in the format of, related in bold and a linked, text after. Being specific. And this is something I've struggled with too, but it's that instead of this, that, or a thing, tell the reader exactly what you're talking about. Don't just say this thing, say, the screen, or well, probably the product more in general, or the PowerShell window that you have open, that specific thing that you're doing. If you've got huge amounts of code, this doesn't always come up, but sometimes it does. You don't want to have just like a giant code, section in there. Only put in what's absolutely necessary. If you do have like a big chunk of code that actually is relevant and should be included, we do have a GitHub repository for ATA, and it can be added in there and then linked to accordingly. And if you do have a larger but not gigantic code block, you don't actually need to write all of the explanation of that code block underneath it. You can actually just use comments within that code, because as someone's following down that process, then it will actually better describe as they're going down what exactly the code is doing. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but some of the things that often come up, questions that people may have. The broader sense of when you're writing is more of the how do you structure it in terms of telling a story, segueing from one section to another, making sure that you're being descriptive, but not overly verbose. You're not getting too far into the weeds. And Adam's touched on that in some of the prior sections, but those are the kind of things we're looking for while in the editing process. One question that often comes up is how to handle comments. The first time you go through the editing process, you'll notice a lot of comments are made. This is not a negative. Even the best writers often have a lot. And it's just sometimes it's little things, sometimes it's questions the editors may have on the technical aspect or that part of it. But one of the things, to keep in mind is not to be overwhelmed by the number of comments or concerned that, oh man, my article has a ton. That's okay. It's just part of the editing process. anyone who's gone through a full proper editing thing will definitely know that comments are very, very common in the quantity that they often show up. So it's okay. Um, One note is that when you are running through the editing process, don't resolve the comments, just reply to them. This will allow the editors to kind of keep track of what's there and what you've worked on, if you've resolved it or not. They'll go ahead and resolve those to clear them off, and then that's kind of a good, almost like a to-do list kind of thing. Um, Try hard not to remove a content by deleting what text was maybe associated with it. Um, the best way to do that is, say you're substantially rewriting a sentence. Sometimes, and I've had this happen, you're like, oh man, this whole thing is, I'm going to lose my comment in there just because it's hard to keep it. You can keep like a single space with it and just leave that comment there. It'll get resolved, but this is a way to rewrite this whole line, but hey, I kept just that one little bit. I made a screenshot kind of what that looks like, but that's a good way to kind of handle it if you need to, or on a new line underneath it. That's fine as well. Ultimately, it'll be resolved, but this way you aren't losing that history as you're going. And one thing that did recently come up, and I didn't quite realize this, but turn off email notifications in Notion when you go through the editing process, because you get an email essentially for each comment. And it's just under your settings within Notion. There's a notification section, but it may be a whole lot of emails you don't really need. You can just go in, because you'll get an email when we move it back to the writer revision stage, and that's coming automatically from our system. So you'll know when you need to go in and actually look. But this way you aren't stuck with getting a billion emails for the comments during the editing stage. So I also wanted to touch a little bit on writing articles themselves, a couple things that come up. As I kind of noted before in the outline, don't overthink it. You really need to simply provide an outline of the content, both the major and minor headers, those H2, H3s, and a simple description. Actually, that's perfect for something later, but really this should take you no more than 20 to 30 minutes at most. It should be simple. It just helps us kind of hone that content down, help you to understand what it is, and then you can kind of go from there. For grammar, Grammarly is the free version is great. You can use the browser plugin for that. And then once you install it, the plugin will look for suggestions to fix a Notion content. You'll notice my and right here, I'm missing a comma. You can kind of tell by this little, the red dot there. And then when I click on it, I can say, oh, yep, I'd like to fix that. One of the things you might notice is sometimes when you're writing and you have that installed, it's not picking up things. And you're like, oh, I guess my wording is great. Oftentimes you need to click into the section itself for it to pick it up. It's kind of a quirk. Someday they'll fix it, but for now, that's the thing, is essentially just keep, click down through each one and it will evaluate that section. And then that's the easiest way to handle most of the grammatical errors. It may find, you'll notice that there's this two, if that's, well, didn't mean to click. That's if you have, they've got additional suggestions mostly around wording and passive, or that kind of, those suggestions for writing. That's for the more expensive version, the non-free one. You don't necessarily need it. If you do a lot of writing, it is a very valuable tool, but it's not necessary. And then finally, a question often comes up around paragraph length. We try to keep the paragraphs to about 300 characters. A lot of folks are like, well, other than like a counting tool, word count tool overall in Notion, there's not really a per paragraph count. That would be really cool, but unfortunately it doesn't have that. So oftentimes you can roughly eyeball it once you get good at it. For example, this paragraph here is 292 characters. Um, I use a tool, wordcounter.net. There's about a billion other ones like this, but it's a way, if I'm unsure, I'll just kind of copy and paste that in there and check. But as you can see, after a while, you'll get a sense of roughly how long it is. If it's a word or two over, that's not a big deal, especially if it makes the sentence flow better. But try to keep it around that, because it's not only it's a readability thing, and it also kind of helps you hone your sentences a little bit too. So it's very useful to kind of keep that in mind. So with that, I just wanted to run through a number of tips, tricks, the process itself, kind of get a sense of, what are the common questions. And, with that, I think that wraps that part up. So I'm going to